The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the show for the love of dogs. And I am so pleased to have Dawn Fifield on my show. Dawn happens to be an administrative assistant for Knoll Publishing Company, which is a company that is growing substantially at the moment. And she is really doing quite a bit for the company. And also, one of the things about Dawn is that Dawn has suffered from a lot of different things, mental health particularly, and she found a way to help her really have a great time in her life and to make life very special for her. And the reason she did that is because she knew that there was something that was going to help her. And that happens to be having a dog. And this particular dog is a very special dog. And I'm going to ask Dawn exactly why this dog is so special to her and how it has helped her. So with that said, Dawn, give our audience an understanding of what it was like for you years ago, and now with your dog, you are absolutely doing fine.
Thank you, Susan, for having me on the show. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about my Bichon mix. We think she is a Bichon poodle. We're not sure. I adopted her from a local animal shelter, and her name is Sherlock. Yes, I know I gave her a boy name. And I adopted Sherlock approximately 3 years ago. Sherlock is actually the second psychiatric service dog I'm working with. And I also adopted my first psychiatric service dog from the same shelter. Unfortunately, I lost him to sudden death. But what both dogs have done for me is actually the greatest benefit is that I've been able to reduce medication. And anyone who experiences a mental health issue knows that sometimes the cure is far worse than the disease. And when I started working with my first dog, his name was Murdoch, I was on 4 different medications. And now I am on currently 1 medication.
That's
and the
wonderful.
dog I'm working with, thank you. The dog I'm working with, she's actually able to detect my anxiety and help me with my mood swings. So that is basically her job description.
Well, how does that happen, Dawn? Because, the brain is a very interesting thing. And a dog, I mean, you're talking about a dog who has some kind of ability to read your mind in a way. And does she really do that? Is she able to understand what's going on in your mind?
I don't think Sherlock is psychic per se. I really think that her ability to detect my needs is based primarily on scent and then secondary vision. I'm starting to believe, as I observe other people who use service animals in this type of capacity, I'm learning incredibly enough that I really do think we give off a scent when our mood or our emotional state changes. And it's that scent that the dog is able to detect. One of the things I saw this morning online was they actually have dogs in, I forgot the country, it's a European country, that are now trained to detect COVID-19. And the only way they would be able to do that is through scent. And they are able to detect it with a 94% accuracy rating.
I have to tell you, Dawn, that's really quite amazing. Now, you mentioned that Sherlock has the ability to kind of understand you through her scent. Now, I want to understand, before you had this dog, and let's go back for a little bit. We will go forward in a moment, but I think it's important to go back. This particular dog, how did you really find her? And what was it about her that made you want to get her?
Sherlock, like I said, was a rescue. So what had happened is Murdoch, unfortunately, he was a poodle Portuguese water dog mix, and he had epilepsy. And I believe it was because of that his body, the disease is very hard on the heart. So his heart stopped, and I lost him within moments, and it was devastating. It put me in bed for literally 2 weeks. And I got a text 3 weeks from the day that I lost Murdoch from a friend at the shelter saying that she thought there's somebody that I would like to meet. So I went down to the shelter. I didn't think I was ready. I really did not. Murdoch was a spectacular dog. He was my best friend. He was my service animal. I don't think I could have been bonded any stronger to him. And when he passed away, it was like chopping my heart into a million pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend said, she knows me well. I volunteered for 24 years at the shelter. And she said, I really do think you should come down and meet this dog. So I went down and I was reluctant. She had a lot of strikes against her. First of all, she was female. I usually work with males because in the dog world, females tend to like males, female dogs, and male dogs tend to work better with females.
Oh.
And so I went down, and she was also shy. And Murdoch was the life of the party. So Murdoch and Sherlock couldn't be any more opposite. He was black, which is ironic. She's completely white. So when I went and sat in the interview room with her, and the first thing she did was she stood up on her back legs and put her front legs onto my knee and just kind of looked up at me and put her head on my knee. And when I saw her, I actually saw Murdoch's face in my mind's eye. It was almost as if he were telling me, this is who I picked out for you.
Right.
And I admittedly, I started crying like a baby. And I actually did some personality testing with her because I knew she was going to be a working dog. I had to know that this was the type of dog that could handle this type of work. And she was really good. She was really good with children and adults. She had no qualms. So that was the first characteristic that you have to look in when you're working with a service animal, that they're accepting of all types of people.
You know, Dawn, we live in a chaotic time right now with the pandemic, and there has been a lot of articles in the newspaper saying that no longer will the airlines allow these service dogs to be on the plane with people because, you know, it has something to do with the COVID. But on the other hand, I'm not really sure. All I know is that they're not doing that anymore. Now, how does that affect you, and how do you think it affects other people? And is it fair? Is the real question. Is it fair that people call these dogs service dogs when really, truly, they may love them and they may find themselves in a situation where having their dog makes them feel better, but on the other hand, should they be taking seats away from people on planes?
I wasn't planning on flying during the COVID pandemic, so I'm a little unprepared, but I will admit that now that we're doing social distancing, people are in every other seat. So the room for an animal, I think, is probably a moot point. However, I do I do have a problem with people who call their dogs a service animal when they're not a service animal. And the distinction between an emotional support animal and a service animal is an emotional support animal does not go through the rigorous training that a psychiatric or a service dog goes through. And actually, there is no, and this is a big misconception, there is no formal certification that the government issues. There's actually no governing body for the psychiatric service dog and a lot of the physical assisted dogs either. There is no governing body. There's no fee that you pay and say, okay, this dog is truly licensed. However, they're responsible dog owners that are going to utilize a service animal. They do go through the testing. There is a test, and you do have to train.
Mm-hmm.
And Murdoch had that training, and we did take the test. It took 6 hours to take the test.
Yeah.
And the way it works is that you keep this paperwork on file. Should a legal issue arise, you're able to produce paperwork saying, hey, this dog was tested, he was trained, he knows what he's doing. As opposed to an emotional support animal, which you just send $70 or whatever to an online quote unquote certification authority. And they send you this little plastic card and a nice looking certificate, and that's it, and a
Yeah.
vest. The dog has no training, no ability to handle busy environments, no specific task. And that's the other distinction between an emotional support animal and a psychiatric or a service dog, is that that dog specifically performs a task for you. In my case, Sherlock will physically put her body against mine when I'm showing signs of anxiety. And that is to basically cue me in on calming down, taking an adult timeout, if you will. And she also will detect my mood swing and will become very clingy. That way I know that there's going to be an issue with my mood. And Murdoch also did the same thing. So that is a specific task that they perform. So when a person comes on board without that training, it makes me upset.
Hmm. Yeah. Dawn, Sherlock is very important to you, and I'm sure that you have some story that's kind of neat, kind of interesting that our audience would love to hear. And it could be a very funny story that you've had with Sherlock. I would like our audience to hear a little story of what it is that makes you, again, feel so great when you're with Sherlock. And I'm sure there is a story also with the other people who you know who have dogs as well. So give our audience just a little bit of an interesting story that they'll find that is very helpful to them.
Sherlock, like I said, was the opposite of Murdoch. Murdoch was a life of the party. He sweeps into a room and will run to everybody and anybody. Sherlock had to learn to do that. And the funny thing about it now, will wander over to somebody and start sniffing them. That is something she would not do when I first got her. And that shows confidence. And I think what really showed me, and this will seem like such a small thing, but it really is a big thing. I went to Burger King one day. Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention businesses, but I went to a restaurant one
It's
day
okay.
and I did the drive-through. Thank you. I did the drive-through and I put my meal on the console between us. She has a seatbelt. She sits. Next thing I know, I hear this crinkling, and I look over, and her whole head is stuck in the bag, and she pops out with two fries hanging out of her mouth, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it takes a lot of confidence for a dog to get that belligerent. And I wanted to say, "Oh, drop it, drop it." Instead, I started laughing because here, this shy dog that had no confidence is now sitting there trying to raid my food, and it just shows that she's like, I'm okay. I like to have fun too, and I had to laugh.
Yeah. There's a program on Netflix today that challenges people with their dogs. They run a circuit around, places all over the world. And it just gives people the understanding that dogs are one of the most important things in people's lives. Even if they have children, they're married, they have friends, but somehow that dog seems to be like their best friend. Okay. Now, I'm sure that Sherlock is your best friend now, but if you could have another dog, would you get another dog so that Sherlock can have a friend?
It's interesting that you asked that question. We actually did over the holidays, we did a medical fostering for a dog that had nearly been starved to death. And Sherlock is 6 years old and he's 2 years old and he was full of energy. And I thought, this is interesting. I'll see if maybe Sherlock wants a buddy. So I was actually considering that. However, when our 2-year-old little foster guy, recovering from all sorts of side effects from starvation, but he was still very active and playful. And he kept trying to engage her and kept trying to engage her. And Sherlock was like, no, I don't know. You're in my home. No. But it's funny, for our volunteer work for the shelter, Sherlock does have a little boyfriend, and she does look forward to working with him and will sit down with him. So I think it's at home, that's her territory. and she's the queen of this territory. Out work, she's like more social. She knows that's a requirement of being outside. So at this point in time, I would not get her a buddy. She's already shown me that she doesn't want one. However, there will come a day that I will have to retire her, and I'll have to work a second dog into that equation.
Yeah. Now, you volunteer for an organization that handles dogs and other animals as well. Now, when you work for or volunteer, um, what do you find that is most interesting about when people come in and how they choose a dog and how they, kind of bond? Is there a bond that happens immediately, or does it take time?
Most of the comments I get from people who have adopted from us, first of all, I haven't heard one complaint in the 24 years that I've been doing this. I've never had somebody come up to me and say, I adopted a dog from your organization and it was the worst thing I ever did. I always hear, I adopted a dog from your organization and it was the best thing I ever did. And that dog was so appreciative. I think in most cases, there is something that occurs. Either it will be an exchange of just looking at the dog. The dog may display some very affectionate behavior, and the person says, "He loves me," right off the bat. It may be a similarity to a past dog that they had in their past. And one thing I really do like about our organization is we do try and encourage the right choice the first time. We
Yeah.
don't want a family to become disappointed and bring the dog back, which is also very stressful for the dog or the cat. We try and see if that bond exists, and if we notice that it's just not working, our adoptions counselors are trained enough to say that, or if it's working out great, they'll point that out too. And
Yeah.
they, in some cases, I'm sure they do sell the dog, but I think for the most part, if I were to give an honest opinion, love at first sight, I think, is how it works
That's a
on
wonderful
both
thing.
parties.
Yeah, very wonderful thing to be able to feel the situation that allows you to kind of have again, I'm going to call him a friend or her a friend. Now, another question that I want to know is people take dogs into nursing homes. Now, I've mentioned this before in some other shows. We've talked about the advantage of bringing a dog into a nursing home and how the patients, if you will, or the people who live there respond. Now, have you ever brought a dog or Sherlock into a nursing home and to assisted living?
I actually did, that's called a therapy dog, and just for clarification, that dog is not considered a service animal because it's giving a service to multiple people, not one specific human being. Although the dogs are wonderful, they're just as capable and wonderful as a service animal. And I did do that for 16 years. I needed a little bit of a change, so I switched over to working with kids. But yes, I've seen um, the cases that you hear about where this person won't talk, but he'll only talk to your dog. I saw a woman who had a stroke and was basically quadriplegic, and I brought my dog in weekly to visit with her. I made sure to seek her out, and by the time we stopped seeing her, she actually was released to go home, and she was almost fully mobile where she could walk, whereas before all she could do when she met with my dog is basically I put my dog by her shoulder. I was working with another dog at the time, and his name was Duffy. He was a nice, big, white, fluffy Havanese, so that fur was just so engaging to people. And she would put her head basically on the dog. That was all she could do. And it
Mhm.
was wonderful to see the progression from just hugging with her head to being able to walk about with him with a walker. And I've had many, many patients just, I see how they blossom and their eyes, they do get the twinkling in their eyes, they do light up. And they also appreciate the human company that comes with it, which is
Yeah.
me. Usually it's the other end of the leash that gets the attention, but every once in a while I get a little attention.
Yeah. And what about dogs helping kids? You mentioned kids, and I think that it's a very important thing that a kid knows that they're loved. And sometimes they don't get that love from their families because of all the situations going on where parents are not available to them because they're working, or you name it. Now, if you ever saw a kid working with a dog, what did it look like? I mean, how did the kid respond?
The children tend to go into their own little world almost. They become that engaged with the dog. And at that moment, the dog is the only thing that matters to them. And you see the happiness. It's nice to know that children who are in a stressful situation can either come to our shelter and participate in the program, or pre-COVID, we would go and we would do visits with kids as well. We do it in the therapy environment, and we do it in the educational environment, which is what I'm currently involved in, where we go to schools and you teach kids about pet safety and pet care, and we do career days, and we have a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club where we do monthly visits with the kids, and it would occur during the school year. And you go in there once a month, and I would go in and ask, hey, how many of you guys think that dogs are there to bite you? And I would get about 80% of the children raising their hands. These are kids that think that animals are to be feared, not to be loved or cared for. And by the end of the year, these kids are just so involved with the dog. How's my Donovan doing? Which was another dog I was working with. How's my buddy doing? Is he okay? And we also had one of the months they would come and do the walk, and they would get exposed to thousands of animals. Now, this is Walk for the Animals. It is the biggest fundraiser for our organization, and it's just amazing to see the kids that don't understand the true animal bond, and they come in and they see thousands of people exhibiting that bond, and it's like a light going on for them. And if one of those kids, when they get older, they adopt a dog because they've seen this, or they want to give a dog a chance because they interacted with us as a child, that I think is a true beauty of the animal bond.
Yeah. You know, Dawn, a lot of people, and I see this all the time, they feed their dogs like regular food. In fact, they give them things like steak, or they give them things like pork chops, you name it. And I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking, is that right? So if you, as a person who's owned dogs and as a person who is, trained dogs, what kind of food should the dog eat? Because not everybody has the money to spend on all the very fancy food for their dogs. So what do you recommend in terms of a diet?
The first thing I recommend, if you're going to bring a dog into your home, into your environment, is to make sure that you have the ability to bring that dog at least once a year for its shots, but more importantly, its examination. Your vet, I always reflect this question to a vet, to their vet, because the vet will know your animal's health and be able to say, this kind of diet will work for your animal. Like Sherlock, May of 2020, I'm sorry, she had to have surgery to remove bladder stones. And first thing out of my mouth is, how do I prevent this? What do I feed her? And she's on a special diet. So if you have an animal with a health issue, you're not going to feed it regular food. And you're definitely not going to, or I don't recommend, that you feed human food. Human food is always a bad idea. It sounds like a great idea. Oh, it's fresh, it's this, it's that. People forget, though, that these foods that we purchase in the grocery store have been treated with different antibiotics, etc., or pesticides if it's a vegetable dish or something. They think that the dog has to eat the same type of diet. They forget that they also put spices and they use oils to cook. They may be doing a lot more harm than good. Now, there is such a thing as a raw food diet. If you're going to do it the most natural way, I suggest you still consult with a vet or a dog nutritionist. If you're going to be a little bit less interactive in the prep, they do make raw food diets that already come prepped. Just take it out of a little bag or slice it off a little roll and put it in the bowl. Whatever you do, consult with your vet first. Do not give your animal cooked bones. Go online, Google foods that are good for my dog, foods that are bad, foods that dogs should never eat. That information is out there en masse, but always go to your vet first. And if you're not comfortable with your vet or what they're recommending, second opinions are okay.
Mm-hmm. So this is, from my standpoint, one of the most important questions that I can ask you, Dawn. You suffer, as we've talked about, and you've been open about it, from depression, anxiety, and various other things. Now, psychologically, how do you handle, and I know this is like ending the show on a negative note, but really it's an important note, and that is, if a dog leaves you, and I'm talking about if a dog dies, as a person who has all these emotional and psychological issues, how would you handle it? And give our audience an understanding, because you're not alone with this, psychological issues. I mean, there are lots of people, and I want them to understand if things happen, because we don't live, we live, but everybody dies, and dogs and animals, they die too. So give our audience a little understanding and a little bit of an inspiration, if you will, about what you will do if, God forbid, something happened to Sherlock.
I went through this very situation when I lost Murdoch. Murdoch was only 7 years old, and he literally passed away in the blink of an eye. It was like somebody shut his light switch off. I was devastated, I'll be honest. And it literally put me in bed for 2 weeks, as I had mentioned before. And I was a dog trainer at the time. So it was even harder not having my dog with me at work. What I can offer your audience in way of advice is to consult your support structure. Most people with a mental health issue have a support structure. In other words, a doctor, a psychiatrist, counselor, maybe even a primary care physician. They should have their family members available. So consult that support structure, but never give up. Continue to look for that animal. When you feel ready to do it, go to a shelter, rescue a dog, consult a trainer, and get yourself another buddy that's going to help you. And you're going to help each other.
Well, we've been talking to Dawn Fifield about dogs and about the understanding of what happens when you own a dog, when you have issues concerning like psychological issues and mental issues and whatever. And she's really given us a lot of insight into how she handles the situation. Now, Dawn, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to speak to you, because you're a person with so much advice that you can offer, how did they get in touch with you?
They can actually email me, Dawn at Knoll Publishing, KNOLL Publishing.com. If I can give them advice that is conclusive and definitive, I will. If I do not have an answer for you, I will try and recommend you to somebody who does.
There you go. Now, our show today has been brought to you by Dylan Mitchell, who is part of something. He's a trainer, and he's in Boca Raton, Florida, and he's given so many dogs training, and each one of these dogs has really been successfully trained. So I want to thank, first of all, Dawn Fifield for being on the Susan Brender show, which is called For the Love of Dogs. And I want to also thank Dylan Mitchell for sponsoring this show. And thank you, Dylan, because look at the kind of guests that we have that offer all of this advice. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me on the show, Susan.